everyone, Lou here. You know, around this wintry time of year is when I like to sit back with a warm cup of coffee or hot chocolate and enjoy some lost media searches. However, I thought it'd be fun this year to talk about some lost anime games. For this video, I'll be covering browser, app store, console, anime dress-up games, and video games that are now considered lost. If they're found later, maybe I'll do an update video, but for now, let's get started. Persona 3 EM. To be honest, I thought the Persona series or the Shin Megami Tensei series would have a lot more lost media under its belt, since it's a pretty lengthy franchise and you'd think some would slip through the cracks, but apparently not because I couldn't find much. This game, though, is a cash grab spin-off of Persona 3 for flip phones in Japan in 2007. Now, I have not played Persona 3 yet or watched the anime films for it, but it takes place during a particular part of the game that was only mentioned in passing before, and I guess plays like a really basic version of Persona 3. However, like many phone games around this time, once servers were shut off for that phone's app store, it's now lost media and only screenshots survived. If you ask me, it looks like it would play like Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories, which, that's kind of meh as someone who doesn't like Chain of Memories gameplay. Just a shame it was lost, since I'm pretty sure it would be really interesting in a retrospective video when talking about Atlus's first attempts and milking the fuck out of a franchise until it starts bleeding. Jungle Emperor Kimba for the Famicom. For people who don't know or have never seen an anime or Disney trivia video in their life, Kimba the White Lion is an anime series based off the manga series of the same name by legendary manga creator Osamu Tezuka. The story, from what I've looked into, is basically the Disney Junior show The Lion Guard if it was written in the 1960s. Many people only really know Kimba the White Lion because everyone says Disney ripped it off for The Lion King, which is probably true, but that's beside the point. The works of Osamu Tezuka have always been insanely popular in Japan. Just about every year I hear of some type of event or anime adaptation of his work. From the millionth Astro Boy adaptation to 2019's Dororo, it's not that shocking that a Kimba video game was made. The game was supposed to release in November 1990 and was developed by Taito. From what I've looked into, Taito is a publisher company in Japan, and their biggest game they've ever published is the Cooking Mama series. You know, that one series that had a game on the Switch that everyone thought was mining bitcoins for some reason? That one. It's unknown why the game was cancelled though, especially because it had quite a few advertisements, and no one knows if there's a fully playable prototype out there. Personally, I'm curious as to how this game would play. From what little screenshots are available, it looks like it would play similarly to the Lion King game on Sega Genesis. Gee, I wonder where Disney's video game department got their inspiration from, I'm just kidding. Anyway, this game in particular is super interesting to me because I don't often see video games based off Osamu Tezuka's work, despite how easy a lot of them would translate into video games. Dragon Ball Z Buchigiri Match. Now, I'm not a fan of Dragon Ball Z, so I apologize if I get anything wrong, but an old friend of mine actually told me about this one when it shut down. This was basically a card game for Dragon Ball Z that I assumed played like Hearthstone or something like that. It was released in 2018 and shut down just 2 years later, which is totally crazy to me that it shut off so quickly like that. I mean, Dragon Ball is a huge moneymaker, so you'd think it'd last a little longer, but who knows? Dragon Ball has so many app games and video games that maybe this just got lost in the oversaturation. Although there is a ton of footage, the game can no longer be personally played anymore, as the game has completely shut off and removed from any app stores. For anyone thinking to emulate it, remember that app games require internet connection to a specific server for that game, which is why people get so pissed when mobile games are shut down, because once they're gone for good. Sadly, this one doesn't seem like it'll be recovered. The game never received an English release, so I have a feeling that this game had so little fanfare that I doubt fan uproar is gonna make the company relaunch it. Luckily, there are other Dragon Ball games. I'm sure there's like a million out there, but it's just a shame for all the people who put their time and money into this one. Noah Schneemaker / Game Chew. Okay, so this one seems a little bit weird because this is all based off my memory and experiences, because I have not found a single person online online talk about this one despite how popular it was with preteens in the early 2010s, but I'm gonna try my best. Noah Schnee Dollmaker was a website me and other weeb kids used to go on where you would make GIF avatars that had a really cute anime style. Think of it like the way you think of anime online avatars like Gaia Online you see here and there from these pictures I have here of my OCs, and yes, I know they're cringe. The website seems to have shut down somewhere around 2018 from what I looked into on the web archive for it, but I can't seem to get the dress-up game to run, likely because it used Flash, which is a shame. If you try to go on the website now, it just links you to an error page telling you that the website name is an open domain ready for use. Also, further Googling, apparently this domain costs around $4,000, which is absolutely ridiculous to me, but there you have it, I guess, if you want to buy it. Actually, I tried to do some more digging after I found the website on the Wayback Machine and found out that the sprites come from a Japanese MMO type game called Gamechew that also looks to have been shut down. From what I could find of screenshots, it looks like some type of gaming place for mahjong. Whoever owned the Noah Schnee Maker website at the time then took those sprites from that place and made a dress-up game out of it. The entire reason I made this video actually was to see if anyone has information on how to bring this maker back. This was honestly such a cute one, and honestly, I'd really love to bring this back for a newer generation of people to enjoy, because I felt like it had a lot of options. Aside from skin tones anyway. I remember skin tones being not an option at all, but that's beside the point. Though something tells me it's kind of impossible to bring back because it's been so long and Flash is dead, so it sounds kind of impossible to me, but I guess crazier things have been recovered. I'm also not a coder, so who knows. Before we get to the finale of this video, here are some honorable mentions. These are games that were partially found or just generally deserved an honorable mention because they're pretty short entries. Akira for the Sega Mega Drive. Although the highly acclaimed anime film Akira received an NES game in December 1988, there was also a Sega Mega Drive game that was supposed to showcase at an electronics show in 1984, and since then has been lost until someone was able to find the game's prototype in 2019. The main reason the game was cancelled was largely due to in-house arguing from the publisher THQ and the lead programmer for the game. THQ pushed for specific game mechanics that weren't technologically possible on the Sega Mega Drive, and it apparently caused so much arguing that the lead programmer quit, and I guess pretty much doomed the game from there. Regardless, the prototype was found and it looks okay. If it had some more polish, I think it could have been a fun game, but as it's just mostly meh. I'm pretty sure for the time it was revolutionary in what it was able to do as an anime-based game, but by modern standards, it's just pretty meh. Jump Force for multiple platforms. Sadly, although releasing in 2018, Jump Force servers shut down completely over this summer. Although the game and its story mode are completely playable to anyone who owns it and is able to purchase a used copy, the game's online store as well as online events and multiplayer are now completely lost. This basically makes you lose the chance to purchase DLC characters such as Giorno Giovanna, Seto Kaiba, Katsuki Bakugo, Grimjo from Bleach, and several other highly anticipated characters to play. Which is a shame because I actually really liked the concept for Jump Force. I mean, where else can I get Jotaro Kujo to beat the shit out of Yugi Moto, or Seto Kaiba to team up with Dio Brando? Also, even though everyone looked mostly ugly in that game, both Jotaro and Giorno looked fucking gorgeous, especially Giorno, who just looks like a L'Oreal model to me. Fire Emblem Maiden of Darkness. The game was supposed to be made for the failed expansion to the N64 called the Disk Drive, and like many games for this failed expansion, a Fire Emblem game was supposed to be made for it. It was supposed to release somewhere around 1997 or 1998 according to a N64 magazine, but was cancelled largely due to the heavily failing sales of the Fire Emblem franchise. What many people don't know is that Fire Emblem deeply struggled financially as a franchise until the release of Fire Emblem Awakening, where it blew the fuck up all over the world and basically revitalized the entire franchise from being cancelled forever. Although I couldn't figure out what the story was, apparently I found Lost Media Wiki posts claiming that a large majority of the plot was later reused in The Binding Blade, which was my first Fire Emblem game I played actually. It's funny though, while researching for this video, both Mother 3 and this Fire Emblem game were both cancelled for the disk drive and were later reworked and ported to Game Boy Advance games. And now to the grand finale of this video. Rinmaru games, and basically any other lost anime dress-up games. Although a large majority of Rinmaru games were saved on the website Doll Divine, I noticed that quite a few dress-up games from Rinmaru that I found either didn't work at all, the quality was terrible, or they just weren't there. Like, I specifically couldn't find this rebel couple dress-up game like you see me put here. Ignore the cringe of my OCs, by the way. Hell, this isn't just about Rinmaru, but pretty much every anime dress-up game in existence. There used to be a fan-made Black Butler dress-up game for CL on DeviantArt, and due to the artist Kuromai deleting their DeviantArt account, I can't seem to find it anywhere. To be honest, it's a massive rabbit hole when you think about situations like that. The rabbit hole goes even deeper when you look at websites like Pit Crew that have Pit Crew dress-up games deleted every single day by talented artists. My biggest example being that Pit Crew 43383 is completely lost and was removed for unknown reasons. Super weird because the male version of this Pit Crew was still up, so I don't really get it. Though upon looking back, apparently the male version of this was also deleted. Goodness knows how deep this rabbit hole goes of lost anime dress-up games. Like, who knows how many that are now completely lost that someone remembers playing in their childhood or their teens. Who knew that there was so many lost anime-based games out there? This was honestly me doing some surface level digging, frankly because I'm a terrible investigator when it comes to lost media, but you guys let me know down below what anime-based games you think are lost media, or if there are any of these that you want to be found. As always, let me know down below. Hey guys, thanks for watching! If you liked the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing if you're new. If any of you would like to help support my channel in any possible way, my Ko-fi page is down below in the description, along with all of my social media. For any subscribers, new or old, who'd like to help with video ideas, or maybe just want to talk about anime or something, I have a fan server linked down below. See you next time!